Great. Hello, good afternoon, or good morning for everyone joining us from the West Coast. This is ACCT's webinar on expanding educational opportunity for incarcerated students through Second Chance Pell. We're so glad to have everyone join us today and to hear from our three great panelists who will be sharing information about their work and experiences in Second Chance Pell programs and prison education programs. So to get started, we're just going to go over a few housekeeping items. First is that all participants and everyone watching, they're on mute. This is in webinar mode, so you can see us, but we can't see you out in the audience. But if you want to interact with us and ask questions, please use the Q&A icon. Feel free to pop in questions at any point during the webinar, and then we'll have a dedicated time towards the end to be able to answer those for you. If there's a question that someone asks and you really like, please give it a thumbs up, and that way we know to keep it at the top of our list. Also want to let everyone know that this event is being recorded and it will be available for you to watch again later on our website or share with any of your colleagues or friends who maybe weren't able to join us today. So again, thank you very much for coming, and we'll get started. So to start off, I'd like to introduce all of our panelists who are joining us today to talk about Second Chance Pell. First is Margaret DeZerga from the Vera Institute of Justice. Next, we have David Bakavoy from Salt Lake Community College, and James Elliott, who is a student. I'm Allison Beer, and I am the Senior Policy Analyst at the Association of Community College Trustees, and I will be your moderator for today's event. So we'll start by just providing a general overview for everyone watching on Second Chance Pell and what the current state of the program is and access for incarcerated students who receive Pell Grant financial aid. So the Pell Grant program in general, we consider to be the bedrock of federal financial aid in terms of equity and access for post-secondary education. For a long time, once Pell Grants did help fund post-secondary education for many incarcerated students. However, since the 1994 crime bill, there's been a ban on the use of these funds for students taking classes in prisons and correctional settings. The ban continues to persist, even though there's experience and research showing that access to post-secondary education is critical for incarcerated individuals to secure jobs, earn higher wages, and avoid recidivism. And with this ban persisting, it's a top advocacy item for community colleges and other people in our communities to overturn this ban and make prison education more affordable and accessible for students. So in addition to the research that shows the benefits of these education programs, we know that there's a great need for individuals to be able to attain higher education in prison settings. So this graph is borrowed from a report by the Vera Institute of Justice and Georgetown Center on Poverty and Inequality, showing data from a US Department of Education survey about what kind of educational experiences people have while they're incarcerated. You can see the red section on the graph that nearly 60% of people don't complete any further education while they're incarcerated, and only about 13% of people complete what might be considered post-secondary education, including a pre-associate education, certificates, or an associate degree. So there's a big opportunity to expand access and allow more people to participate in post-secondary programs while incarcerated. Even though we have the congressional ban on Pell Grants for incarcerated students, there are some current opportunities for repealing these bans and having what we refer to as Second Chance Pell. So we currently have the Second Chance Pell pilot program, which was started under the Obama administration at the US Department of Education, which allows a selected group of prison education programs to offer Pell Grants for their students. The pilot program has been expanded under the current Trump administration and it now includes over 80 community colleges that are able to participate. There are also legislative opportunities that we hope will allow us to completely repeal the ban of Pell Grants for students participating in prison education. And that includes through the Higher Education Act reauthorization or even through the appropriations process. So in today's panel discussion that will follow, we'll learn more about examples of prison education programs, insights into the role Second Chance Pell can play in the lives of students, perspectives on how Second Chance Pell can improve equity and inclusion in post-secondary education, and an overview of the federal policy landscape as it relates to repealing the ban for Pell for incarcerated students. So I'm now going to turn it over to each of our panelists to give introductory remarks, and we'll start with Margaret.
Thank you, Allison, and thank you all so much for joining us today. I'm Margaret DeZerga from the Vera Institute of Justice. So I want to talk a little bit about sort of three ways that, when you're advocating for this issue, I think you can really appeal to a range of different audiences. And at Vera, just to give you a little bit of context, we are the designated technical assistance provider for the Second Chance Pell sites participating in the Department of Education's Experimental Sites Initiative. So we have the good fortune to get to work with all 130 colleges across 42 states and DC. So we're working both with the colleges and the corrections departments in those states, and it's great to see a lot of familiar names on the attendee list from New Jersey and North Carolina and Ohio. So we're doing that work, and then at the same time, we're also working alongside many organizations that are really trying to get this ban lifted at the congressional level so that many more students beyond those participating in Second Chance Pell can pursue their own higher education. So one of the reasons that we think this work is really important is really around equity. We know that Black people comprise 13% of our nation's population, but they are a third of the incarcerated population. And when we look at Latinx people, they comprise about 18% of our nation's population and 23% of the prison population. So thinking about communities that have not had access to education or maybe have not been encouraged to pursue higher education, we think that equity is a core reason to be increasing access to higher education for people in prison. When we looked at the Second Chance Pell students, we were pleased to see that the proportion of Second Chance Pell students who identify as Black is roughly proportional to the Black population in the prison system. And interestingly, that means it's about 2 times that of the number of Black students on college campuses. So it's terrific that many of you are engaged in this work and reaching students during their incarceration. Another reason why this work is so important is really around opportunity. And Allison mentioned this earlier. We saw in that same report, the same Investing in Futures report, that when incarcerated individuals are returning to the community with a post-secondary credential, they earn higher wages. That creates more opportunities for themselves and their families. There are wonderful examples from our partners at Asnuntuck Community College in Connecticut, for example, where people are completing an advanced manufacturing certificate in prison. There's strong relationships with employers in the community, and people are actually getting hired pre-release, walking out into those high quality jobs with a real pathway for advancement and future education, should they wish to pursue that. And then the last reason is really around safety. So we know that in prisons that have post-secondary education programs, there are fewer incidents of violence. So that creates a safer environment for the people living in prison as well as for the staff working there. And then when we think about people returning to our communities, there's a 48% reduction in recidivism for people who participate in education programs. And that means that there are fewer crime victims. So no matter why this work matters to you from an equity and opportunity or a safety perspective, there's a lot of reasons to stay motivated to do more, and hopefully we can get a big win soon. But I'll leave it there for now and pass it back to Allison.
Thank you, Margaret. We're now going to hear from David to talk about the programs at Salt Lake Community College.
Thank you so much, Allison. It's wonderful to be with you all today and to be able to talk about our prison education program at Salt Lake Community College. Our program was founded in 2017. Our PEP program, Prison Education, provides a model for inclusive and transformative education in the lives of incarcerated students. The program operates upon the principle of open enrollment, accepting all students above the age of 18 who have earned either a high school diploma or a GED. For those unable to successfully perform college level work, the Salt Lake Community College Prison Education Program offers non-accredited courses designed to prepare students to successfully complete their general education credits. Through higher education, the Salt Lake Community College Prison Education Program changes the way incarcerated students see themselves as individuals and as members of a larger community. The Prison Education Program offers courses that alter the trajectory of students' lives, strengthens families that have been hurt or compromised, and enhances students' reentry into mainstream society. The PEP operates according to the principle that every human being deserves education and that the community carries an ethical responsibility to ensure access to higher education within the Utah prison system. This effort is essential, as has been mentioned by others already, but especially for us here in the state of Utah. According to the National Institute of Justice, nearly 44% of inmates return to prison within the first year of their release. However, here in Utah, we are currently higher than the national average with a recidivism rate of over 50%. This is where higher education in the prison system can make a tremendous difference. An important study published in 2018 in the Journal of Experimental Criminology showed that inmates participating in correctional education programs were 28% less likely to recidivate. Over a 3-year period, every dollar, and this is important, every dollar invested in correctional education saves nearly 5 in incarceration costs for US taxpayers. The United States Sentencing Commission has shown that inmates with less than a high school diploma had a 60% recidivism rate, whereas those with a college degree had only a 19% recidivism rate. These numbers, of course, for us as educators prove meaningful. In Utah, they have led to a bipartisan support of higher education in the prison system. Lowering the recidivism rate is not only good in terms of social justice, things like that, that many of us as educators care very passionately about. It quite literally saves taxpayers money. And as a college committed to serving the community, Salt Lake Community College has taken the lead in our state in providing accredited college courses in the Utah prison system. We began, as I mentioned, in 2017, and to make a long story short, we started with money from the state that allowed us to put 47 students in 3 classes in the prison system. That was the summer of 2017. Our last full semester prior to COVID challenges was spring 2020 of this year. We had 237 students in 12 classes. In 2020, Salt Lake Community College was selected by the Department of Education as one of those institutions that Allison mentioned across the country to help pilot the restitution of Pell Grant services to incarcerated students. We plan on taking full advantage of that opportunity and increasing throughout the prison system. I probably just perhaps the best thing that I could do to share with you how important this is um, maybe quote from one of our students, a student by the name of Mike, who is incarcerated and about ready to graduate. He sent me this statement. When living at home with my wife and kids, I was not able to help my kids with math or English because I'd forgotten most of what I had learned over many years. I am 49 now. I only went to one semester of college when I was a teenager. Thank you for providing me the opportunity in prison to learn so I can be a better father to my children. I've been calling my kids and teaching them what I'm learning and helping them with their schoolwork over the phone because I am now smart enough to do that. Thanks to great instructors and classes, you are helping me build relationships with my kids who I miss so much. This education will also help me in my work when I get out and help me to be a better citizen so that I do not recidivate and go back to prison, which will also save taxpayers lots of money. God bless you for helping a criminal to be better. I hope to pay it forward. This is just one statement of many that I could share of the students that we have an opportunity to work with at Salt Lake Community College. Our program is unique in that we do offer face-to-face instruction. It's not an online program. We bring in full-time or adjunct professors from Salt Lake Community College and offer face-to-face instruction in the prison system, which I feel passionately about doing because of many of the men and women that are there because of antisocial behavioral challenges. And so providing a positive social environment where they can interact with one another and with a trained professional instructor is part of the transformative education that we try to provide at Salt Lake Community College. Thank you so much.
Thank you, David. I'm sure we'll have more questions to ask about your involvement in the pilot program and how you're tailoring your programs during the pandemic when we get to the Q&A. And also thank you for bringing up student voices, because that will be a good segue to hear from our next panelist, James, who is a student and is going to tell us more about his experience.
Thank you, Allison. And I'd just like to thank ACCT for having me on this panel discussion. I don't know, I can't see you all, but I'm sure some of you might remember me. I spoke at the conference in San Francisco. I was the past international president of PTK, the first international president with a criminal history background, or previously incarcerated. So I'm very passionate about this topic and the Second Chance Pell Grant, and especially prison education, because my trajectory since release started with my education in prison. In 2011, I was incarcerated for 7 years for my involvement in a armed robbery of a drug dealer. So for the first 3 years, I didn't really do too much. And I think this speaks to Vera Institutes of Justice statistic that Margaret gave you, that incarcerated people who participate in post-secondary education programs are 48% less likely. So in those first 3 years of prison, things that I had to do to kind of rehabilitate myself, little minor anger management courses, alternative to violence courses, decision-making courses. And then I had some odd and end jobs. I worked in the kitchen. I worked cleaning offices and bathrooms, laundry, store, and commissary. So this is before education. So if I was just to have done those things and left prison, I might be able to be a janitor, could possibly work at a grocery store, could do jobs that were okay, that would provide for me. But I like to give this, when I got out, I applied for a janitor's job, and guess what? I didn't get that position because I was a felon. So even with the skills and trainings that I did adapt that might have been able to provide for me, I was still kept out of that. So roughly around 2014, I was able to get enrolled in Ohio University. Unfortunately, at the time in Delaware, no college had decided to take up the Second Chance Pell Grant program. And so this was going to be out-of-pocket costs, which for most people who are incarcerated, if they don't have a strong support system, aren't going to be able to meet that expensive bill. Unfortunately, I had a strong support system to do that. The Second Chance Pell Grant program is a great support system for all individuals who might not have that family support. And so, again, I encourage you to get enrolled in that so it can be an option. But once I got an education, my life was able to change. I was able to have a foundation. I mean, everything that David said and the quote at the end from the incarcerated individual, Mike, I went through the same thing. It gave me confidence. It gave me passion. I've always been a rebel, and it gave me, as I pursued education, it gave me this thing where I can be a rebel in a constructive way. I can be an activist now. I don't have to act out against society that I was upset at because it was treating me a certain way, being a person of color. I was able to find, it gave me the power to change myself. And I think that was the most important thing. I wasn't just sitting in prison doing odds and end jobs, facilitating basically the prison. I mean, we run the prison for the prison. We do their jobs and they pay us like 7 cents an hour. It's a ridiculous amount of money for the work that we did. So I was able to invest in myself. And even with the recidivism rates dropping outside, we see inside of prison as well. Margaret and David hit on these points. I myself became a less violent offender in prison. I had something to lose because I wanted to take my education courses and I wanted to keep investing in myself, and I didn't want to lose that opportunity. It also just allowed me to grow and mature and make smarter decisions. So my opportunities fully changed. And I think, Margaret was touching on my ability to now provide. David touched on Mike, he has a family. I didn't have a daughter yet, but I have a daughter now. And if I didn't have education and I wouldn't be at Columbia University today, what would my life be like providing for my daughter and for my family? And at the end of the day, I think Margaret touched it so well. If it's not equity, then it's safety. I'm out here now doing well and I'm not reoffending. How many more times could I have reoffended? Who else could I have hurt? How many more countless people could have been affected by not providing the opportunities of education? And we see that it makes our community safer. And I think in general, as I close, the idea of our prison system needs to shift from, security. The top priority when I was incarcerated was safety, but it was safety in a sense that we're going to limit all movement, all interactions. There's going to be limited resources for you to do. Like, we just want to keep you locked in a cell or on a pod where we know you can't do anything. And we just know from being in prison, I know that just creates bitter people who are hurting, people who aren't having the opportunity to change their lives. And so when we think about changing our criminal justice system, thinking about prisons, education is so key. And it's each and every one of you really should look at yourselves as a college administrator or a college board trustee, a college president, but also look at yourself as almost like a warden, because you hold a key to rehabilitation. And it's unfortunate that we've pushed that outside of our prisons, and I'm happy to see that come back. So I would challenge you to view yourself today, not just as a college administrator, not just as a college president, but also a member of our criminal justice system. And you play a vital role that can change many lives and make our country safer and just make our community safer in general that we stay in. And so I would challenge you to look at education, traditional education, and also technical training. I went the traditional route, but technical training is one that applies, that a lot of guys look forward to, a lot of guys want to take and want to do. And like we said, when they get out, they can go straight into a job that's going to provide for them, and not end up in the food industry making minimum wage like I had to, or getting denied a janitor's position and not having the resources you need to take care of yourself so that you don't have to reoffend. Thank you.
Thank you, James, for sharing more about your experience and all your insights with us. We're going to move into questions that I have for our panelists. And as we're doing that, again, people in our audience, please put your own questions in the Q&A so we can answer those as well. But I'm going to start with a question for all three of our panelists. You all just shared a lot of important information about how important education in prison is and how powerful and transformational those programs can be. We think of Pell Grants as opening up doors for people to participate in these programs. So without Pell Grants for most students to participate in prison education programs, what are some of the barriers, either financial or otherwise, that students are facing currently to access education programs while they're incarcerated? And that's a question for all three of you to jump in.
Well, from what we see, tuition is really the biggest barrier. There's huge demand from incarcerated individuals to participate in these programs. There's been tremendous interest from colleges. One data point would be the number of colleges that applied to be part of Second Chance Pell in 2016, and then again, another huge applicant pool in 2020. And then frankly, the growing number of programs that have figured out other ways to start teaching in prison through grants or contracts with corrections departments or creative scholarship ideas. And so it's really tuition is a big challenge. And then I think the other thing, as many of you know who are working in the prisons, is that space is also a big constraint. So prisons, by and large, were not designed to have tons of great program and education space. And so those classrooms are a very precious commodity, and they're used for a lot of different things. So that's can be another kind of rate limiting step.
Yeah, and to piggyback off of what Margaret is saying, with tuition is definitely key. I mean, like I noticed, like I was trying to say, without Delaware having anyone involved in the Second Chance program at the time, I had to pay out of pocket. My family had to pay out of pocket for that opportunity, which realistically, I mean, a lot of people who are incarcerated are coming from impoverished communities. They're not even going to be able to afford that. And then secondly, for me, so the struggle for me was I was taking classes through distance learning without that second chance Pell Grant, and I think inside the state, and I'm so happy that Delaware Tech in my state picked it up. That builds more of a connection with the Department of Corrections. And if you work in a facility, David knows, Margaret knows, if any of you guys do too, that relationship is hard because you have two people thinking in two different ways. You know, Department of Corrections is thinking security, you're thinking education and opportunity, and sometimes they clash. So I didn't have Ohio in state. I didn't have that relationship with Ohio University in my facility. It was really just me on my own. So I didn't have educators to turn to. DOC didn't feel responsible for my education. So like if I needed to do schoolwork and I'm like, well, I'm taking this course, some of the correctional officers, I don't know what this is. This is just not, this is foreign to me. I don't really care. And so that's a struggle. So I think that's important. And with the second chance Pell Grant, you're working with colleges inside the state and you're working with state corrections and you're building that relationship. They're understanding what is going on now and the purpose of it, which will then help facilitate learning for the people who are incarcerated.
Indeed, the biggest challenge for a prison education program is without question just finances. We were successful, as I mentioned, to get going to present our case to the Utah legislature in 2017. It's no secret that the state of Utah is a red state, highly conservative politically and socially. And so, those of us who feel passionate about social justice were able to present it in the way that I outlined in terms of the financial benefits that the taxpayers of Utah will receive through a program such as this, which are very clearly there and available to all of us, not only in Utah, but everywhere. And so, as I mentioned, we were able to obtain, as a result, bipartisan support to get this program going because of social justice values, but also because of the taxpayer dollars that can be saved. So, to emphasize that was very important for us in this conservative state of Utah. One of the challenges we faced is that many people here are opposed to the concept of quote unquote free college education, something that I have no doubt many of us as educators would love to see happen. But it's not something that the legislature and many of the people here in Utah want to have happen. In fact, one of the challenges that you immediately run across is that people in the community will say, wait, a person in prison is getting a free college education, whereas I have to pay for this education for my students, for my children. That's not fair. I don't like that. So these are challenges socially, politically that you encounter, but there you can explain those to people. And we have done so and have been able to be successful in that effort by taking that bipartisan approach and obtaining those dollars. So once we were able to do that and get the program going, then we were able to successfully, as I mentioned, apply for the restitution of Pell, which we anticipate will take us into further opportunities and growth.
Thank you all. David, I want to segue into asking you more, if you can talk a little bit more about your program and your involvement in the Second Chance Pell Pilot Program. This is one opportunity that a select group of colleges and prisons have to offer financial aid for their students. We also have a question in the chat about technology access. So if you maybe address that in your answer and how you've had to adapt your programs during the pandemic.
Wow, these are great questions. Just I guess to start with, then, in terms of adaptation, it's essential that we as a college community learn to adapt to the unique environment of corrections. It's blending two very different worlds, and the challenges we face them every single day. Um, but I'd say, and I think it was James that kind of gave emphasis to this. One of the things that we've seen the Department of Correction officers and staff members recognize is that by bringing education in, we help them with their primary objective, which is in fact security. It just and we emphasize that, and they see it, and we get we have full support now from the Department of Correction. It's been quite wonderful. Nonetheless, the challenges are there in terms of technology. Our students currently don't have access to tablets and they don't have access to computers. Prison programs are not going to want to give unlimited access, obviously, to the internet to incarcerated individuals. These are all significant challenges and barriers that a program must face when considering going into a prison and offering higher education. We have one of the other challenges that a program such as this faces, particularly when they take the course that we have, which is to emphasize face-to-face instruction with incarcerated students, is that prison programs will inevitably face considerable lockdown times. Even prior to the COVID problem, we had times when our instructors couldn't enter the facility because of security reasons. We had times when there were fights that would break out in a unit, and so our students could not physically come to class. And so this is one of the reasons why most prison education programs across the country try to go with online or correspondence learning. If that's the only option, I certainly support that. But as I mentioned, I don't feel it's the ideal for the population that we're dealing with. And so what we run at Salt Lake Community College is a hybrid program. So our courses are designed as face-to-face instruction opportunities for the students, but our faculty prepare a second syllabus that will allow the students to have makeup assignments and work that will take the place of lost seat time when a lockdown is experienced in the prison. That's been especially important to us with COVID. We were excited, as I mentioned, in spring of this year to start the restitution of Pell because we'd been selected, but we haven't had access because of COVID breakouts to our students before the start of the semester to help them fill out the FOSSas. So we're still waiting to implement that and making plans to start that beginning the summer of this year. And yeah, I'm quite confident that that will transpire, but it is a challenge. And these are some of the things that we've done to try to address those issues.
Thank you, David. I think you highlight some important points that Pell restoration is a piece of the puzzle, but there are also a lot of other supports that are needed to make a prison education program run effectively and serve their students. James, you talked about how transformational your prison education program was to your life. Can you share more with what your educational experience has been since re-entering and where you are now?
Yeah, it's been everything. Transformational is like an understatement. When I got out, I only accumulated 18 credits while I was in there over 4 years. I worked really slow. It was paper-based pencil, and it was hard, but I got that foundation. The biggest thing, and like Dave was touching, you have these. It would be nice to be in person, and I would have loved that opportunity to interact with my instructors. But I think I was changed just through paper. Like I have little comments still on the assignments that I have today of my political science professor, that the class I took there, just writing, great job, James. Those little things to someone who's incarcerated, I dropped out of community college twice. When I got arrested, I was at a community college. I was attending a community college. So I didn't really believe in myself. And those little comments mean everything. I mean, any little bit of contact that you can get is beneficial and is definitely going to help transform. But for me, I got out, I got enrolled back into my community college. I did really well there, and I got involved with Phi Theta Kappa, and my passion for prison reform has really, that's something that I learned through my education while I was in prison with is prison reform and being an activist, and that took hold of me. And I got to speak at many different places throughout the country. I got to go back into prisons. I actually was with Warwick Community College for their first graduating class, and to see these 4 men who all graduated with, I think it was 4 men. I think, and all 4 of them had a 4.0. I mean, a lot of these prison programs are seeing these guys that aren't just good students. They're actually like honor students. I know at Jackson College, Dr. Fallon is someone that I talked to, and a lot of his honor roll is from the prison program. I mean, these guys really invest. They have the time and they're passionate about it. So that happened for me. And then today, I've just, I'm at Columbia University. I'm going there, attending there on a full ride. I have 2 scholarships that I received, and they actually benefit my daughter. I have a daughter, like I said, and the scholarship, I have so much money that I can pay for my daughter, and that's really important. I can pay for housing, for people who are coming back into society. And I move into New York City. It's hard for me to apply for a house or an apartment because I have to give my record. So having that assistance from the school allows me to be, the person that I am today, allows me to have the dreams that I have today. And I tie it back to that class. I'm a political science major now at Columbia. I'm doing really well this first semester, and I can just tie it back to that first initial class in there, and it just changed the trajectory of my life. Again, it's that 48% that we were talking about. If I didn't have that educational program, where would I be right now with just the skills that I had? Maybe I would have got a janitor's job at a hospital. I mean, that was like my ideal thing. Like get a janitor's job at a hospital, get benefits, and support myself. And to see now, I have dreams of being a lawyer or a judge. And these are things that only would have happened through my education.
Thanks, James. Just a quick follow-up for you too, looking at some questions in the chat. With continuing your education, have you experienced any challenges or problems such as transferring credits, filling out your FAFSA, or accessing information about available programs? Either challenges or bright spots, maybe you want to highlight either or.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the biggest challenges I faced initially were upon my release. I went to a work release facility. Unfortunately, I couldn't go to school there. And then getting out, I was on a bracelet, so I was on house arrest. And when you go to register for classes, I had been incarcerated for 5.5 years. I'm going back to my college campus. Things are moved around. I'm on a strict time limit. I'm trying to get there. I'm trying to figure out how to get enrolled. Things don't always go the right way. So I definitely faced struggles early on. But I think Delaware Tech did a great job at, I sought out the department chair, and I, made it important for me to talk to her about my situation. And so I think that she did a great job in making sure that I was going to be able to communicate with my professors, and I was going to be able to uphold the restrictions of my ankle monitor and still complete classes. So I think I got really lucky there. I think the community college's ability and college's ability to understand these struggles that individuals are going to face being released can kind of smooth out those issues. And again, housing was another one now with transferring to Columbia. I specifically picked the School of General Studies at Columbia because I knew they had a community, and I knew that they sought out people who have been incarcerated to come to their institution. So I knew that they had this structure there for me to thrive, which I truly need. I mean, it's those wraparound services, right? I needed more than just the average student, most likely, because I had a lot more things going on, a lot more restrictions. And so luckily I haven't faced that much. And I got great help from Phi Theta Kappa, who has decided, that changed their constitution in 2016 to accept members. And so that was financial needs and things like that. But there are a lot of struggles that guys go through. And luckily I haven't had to go through many of them because there's institutions who care and are focusing on the needs that I needed to have met.
This is, in fact, a very important question. I'm glad it was raised. One of the things that I've noticed is that when our students are released, that they oftentimes feel concerned and an aversion towards using computer system and modern technology and email, especially if they've been incarcerated for a long period of time. So to address that issue and to help them, particularly those who haven't finished yet their associate degree through Salt Lake Community College, but we hope will continue on one of our mainstream campuses throughout the Valley, we do 2 things. One thing we have established at Salt Lake Community College is a reintegration program. So our focus as a prison education program is really to bring education into the prison system. Once they've been released, I sit down with each of those students and or former students even, and try to provide a little bit of academic advisement and direction. But ultimately, I will then pass them off to our reintegration program and those that are involved with that at Salt Lake Community College. And the 2 programs then work hand in hand to try to provide this important resource for our community. So going back then, two things. The reintegration program is one to be set up in connection with a prison education program. And then number two, we are striving to try to provide tablet technology together with our education. We have some outside donors and we're working with various institutions to make sure that this happens with the Department of Corrections, because that will improve our education while inside the prison, but it also hopefully will overcome that obstacle that I identified that many formerly incarcerated people face when they have to then jump on and set up email accounts and face the challenges of modern technology.
Thank you, David and James, for talking about those educational pathways and supports and programs that need to be in place. I'm going to pivot a little bit and ask my next question for Margaret. So as we think about advocacy for restoring Pell for incarcerated students, what are the current opportunities for legislative changes? And then also, what do you expect to be opportunities moving into the new Congress next year and the new presidential administration?
Sure. So obviously my giant caveat is I don't have a crystal ball. And as we've learned anything this year is that we can't predict anything. But under that context, so this year, has been really remarkable for our issue because in July, the House passed legislation that lifts the ban on Pell Grants for all people in state and federal prison. As many of you know, people in jail, people in juvenile facilities, people in halfway houses, they have retained their Pell eligibility. So people in those settings are okay because it's not about your sentence, it's about your location. But in July, the House passed this legislation, and so we will see. There's a couple weeks left in this month where things could move on the Senate side, which would be great. If that doesn't happen, then under the next administration and the new Congress, they could take back up this issue. So let's say appropriations does not get done this year, then it is possible that in the next Congress, they would start with the House package from July, which has a lift of the ban for Pell for all people in state and federal prison. And we would hope that that would be successful, potentially in the first quarter or something like that. So I don't know. It's hard to predict what else will go on. I think, the fact that the second chance Pell there's been so much interest in it from colleges and corrections departments, and that it doubled under the Trump administration is further evidence of bipartisan support for this issue. And then the other piece of legislation or the other bill that has been introduced several times is the REAL Act. It's been introduced with bipartisan co-sponsors in the House and Senate this year. If we don't get it done this year, I expect we'll see reintroduction again next year. So that would be another potential vehicle that could get attached to something.
Thanks, Margaret. Yeah, just to add a little bit more context there. So we have a few days left this year for appropriations process, and there has been talk about including a repeal of the Pell ban through the appropriations process, but we know that there are people who don't favor that approach. So other options might be next year through a Higher Education Act reauthorization that we're hoping to see sooner rather than later, or also, like you mentioned, a reintroduction of the REAL Act. I am quickly peeking at our Q&A. And I will, keeping on this topic, ask my next question for all three of our panelists, and we can go in reverse order for this one. So Margaret, James, and then David. As trustees prepare to advocate in February at our National Legislative Conference and include Second Chance Pell on their list of priorities, what's one piece of information that they should know that they can use to make a strong case for Second Chance Pell when talking to legislators and other policymakers in DC?
So, I mean, I would just go back to, picking up either the equity, opportunity, or safety argument, whichever one you feel strongest about. I think that's something that you are all uniquely positioned to speak to. For those of you who are also business owners, we've certainly seen tons of support for this issue from the US Chamber of Commerce, from chambers in states across the country. And so I think, depending on what hat you want to kind of bring to that meeting, I would say that focus on safety, equity, or opportunity.
Yeah, I think those are three strong, great points. And I think hopefully I was able to illustrate how each one of those in my life has been affected. And just to piggyback off the humanity point, I'll take a more abstract approach to it. I'm kind of a more radical thinker nowadays. It's time to rethink incarceration. It's time to rethink imprisonment. It's time to rethink what are we really doing? Are we making this a safer place? Again, to the safety, are we providing opportunities? Are we making our communities more equitable? And I think, that's really what we need to be looking at. And I think bringing education back into it is that start of reshaping what our prison system looks like. I'm someone who committed a violent crime. I would never dispute that I didn't deserve to do time. I hurt people, and I affected people in many different ways, I'm remorseful for that, and I do need to serve time. But also, I don't want to commit another crime. And right now, guys are going back to prison just to commit another crime. They're not getting what the men and women are going back to prison. They're not getting what they need. So I think this is the start of challenging them to rethink how we view incarcerating individuals in America and where we want to be in the future.
Okay, I would say two things. I would say one, that 70% of those, nearly 70% of those who earn a degree in higher education will not return. That's important to share. The second thing to share is that every dollar that is invested in correctional education saves nearly 5 in incarceration costs for US taxpayers. Those are two important pieces of information that need to be presented when you advocate for these programs. And then just to conclude, I was talking about the challenge that we face in terms of free college education here in the state of Utah, and how that's sometimes raised as a concern. And I needed to return to that because I didn't quite finish explaining how we deal with that at Salt Lake Community College. And this was with the direction of the legislature here in Utah. And that is, our students sign a promissory note that states that upon release, they will do what they can to pay back a percentage of that debt to the program, that those funds then can be recycled into the program and used to help other individuals. But it's not, the important thing to emphasize is it's not a hard debt that they're acquiring, because we're not trying to put them in a difficult situation. It's already difficult enough to get out and to pay child restitution or whatever they have to face, and in those challenges. We don't want to interfere with that, so we don't go after people. But they do sign that promissory note stating that they will do what they can to help contribute back to the program and pick up some of those costs. And that has created a lot of good feelings on the part of folks here in the state of Utah.
It's interesting, David, because I think another way to sort of get at the Pell issue is, the students who are incarcerated are accessing their own Pell eligibility, right? It doesn't mean that I don't need to tell this audience, but it doesn't mean that if, one person gets a Pell Grant, it means another cannot. And so they are accessing their same Pell eligibility, they're just doing it sooner. And I think, Rand actually did a study of what happened to education programs in prison following the last recession. And as state budgets continued to be in bad shape, prison education and other programs or prisons were cut. We cannot let that happen again as a result of this pandemic. So I think that's another way you can sort of push the sense of urgency. State budgets are hurting. Helping students access their Pell eligibility to bring in the wonderful programs that your colleges can provide can help supplement or complement, what might be already available. And we can't repeat the mistakes following the last recession.
Thank you, Margaret. Very important point. That is why absolutely we need to see Pell restored unilaterally. I'm absolutely on board with this. It's so important. it's important to clarify then that point that they're accessing their Pell dollars that we all have access to as US citizens. Indeed, my reference is how we got started, because we weren't able to start with the Pell federal funding. We had to start with the state funding that came from a very conservative Utah legislature, and that's how we were able to navigate that challenge.
Thank you all. We have a few minutes left, so we have time for a few more questions from the chat. I see a few questions that are more about program implementation. So I'm actually going to send those to David for him to answer offline and stick with the questions that are more tied to advocacy and messaging. So we have a question. What do you say to a voter who indicated that she has to pay her child's education and ask why incarcerated people get a free education? So you touched on this a little bit earlier. Can anyone add to what kind of messaging we can use to make the case to the public who might not be on board with this idea?
I've spoken a lot already on this topic, so I don't want to monopolize it, but I'll be very brief, and I'll share the first conversation I ever had with the warden here at Department of Corrections in Utah. We sat down, and ex Green Beret and military man. He and I could not be more different, but he sat there and he opened up. He said, "I'm all for education, as much education as possible. The public needs to recognize that 90% of the men and women that are here in this prison system will eventually return to mainstream society. They'll be your grocers, your mechanics, your neighbors, your friends. What type of society do we want to create? We have to educate this population." And then he added this. He said it was very funny, but he said, "But we just don't want to give them too much education because we don't want them to all become Democrats." Which we're in a very conservative political environment, but so I face this all of the time. And if anybody has any specific questions, or I can be a resource, I would be happy to help that, because it's so important.
I would also tend to say, that David brought up, it's educational dollars 1 to 5, right? You could, there's national recidivism rate is upwards of 80%. I mean, our incarceration, again, I know that some people aren't there yet to grasp, to understand it, but our prison system does not work. I mean, it just doesn't work the way it's set up. And we've seen what happens in 1994, the research after, with that, with removing education programs. It's just not, it's not an effective way. And again, we have to rethink, if our goal is, what is our goal? I would ask them, what's your goal for someone who's in prison? Is it rehabilitation, or do you just want to lock that person away? And again, 90% of people are going to come back out. So everyone's goal in this country should be rehabilitation. And everyone's goal then should be education, because it's a smarter way that we are all spending our money, and it's a smarter way that we are making our community safer. So I would just challenge people to not look at it as someone's getting something and I'm not. It's, we are more effectively dealing with the problem by doing this. I mean, we really have to explain that to people, especially in this society who is, criminalization of people of color has been used as a political tool forever, and people run campaigns off of that. And we really have to break that down. That's been used in dog whistle politics since the 1980s, and it's 40 years later, and we're seeing the product of what happened. It's going to have to take us in educating our populations, educating our communities, educating our the people that are voting for us, to try to tell them, like, we are doing what you really want to do with incarceration through education. And that's really what really needs to be done, I think.
Yeah, I would just add really briefly, we've done some national polling on this issue on 3 separate occasions, and recently we ran a poll in several of the battleground states, and voter support is actually quite high for this issue. And when people learn more about it, their level of support increases. So while of course we could all find a couple of people who won't be moved, generally the voting public is very supportive on this issue.
Thank you all. We're nearing the end of our hour, so just want to give everyone virtual round of applause, another big thank you for joining us today and sharing with our audience the importance of Second Chance Pell and advocating for this issue. Before we sign off, I just have a few announcements to make. So this was the third of our three-part series on Pell Grants to help ACCT members get ready for our upcoming National Legislative Summit. So this year's summit will be February 8th through 10th. We are going to see you all virtually this year, and be excited for our virtual meetings with people on the Hill. We know we're going to have a great turnout in this new format. So if you're looking for more information on the event and to register, you can check it out at nls.acct.org. The website is on the screen for you. Also, if you have any further questions or looking for more resources, feel free to reach out to the ACCT Public Policy team. Our general email account is publicpolicy@acct.org. You can also reach me directly at abeer@acct.org. And also check out more of the resources we have on our website, on our advocacy page, also our ACCT Now blog, our In the Know podcast, and all of the social media and resources that we provide for you all. Thank you again, and this has been a great event. Thanks for everyone.